So, obviously, they're saying, well, they're not saying we want to make it legal as a medicine in that respect. I suppose what they're saying is, well, anybody ought to be able to produce it however they want to and sell it the way they are now. That, of course, has certain problems with it. I mean, I think many people, I know some of your listeners will want to say we shouldn't have any regulations at all. Well, that may be the view of some.
Let's go ahead, and I understand where you're going with this, but I got to ask this question.
Yeah.
Any regulation, once you start, you create a black market. I mean, does that outweigh whatever benefit we get from putting it into, we said you can do this under these conditions category? I'll give you an example. Mark Victor talked about this in his debate because they were talking about, the same kind of stuff. He goes, look, I'll tell you, I've been to Amsterdam 3 times, and you go there and you go in and you get the drugs and they bring out a menu and you negotiate a price and you get it and you walk in, the officer, behind you outside there just walks by, doesn't care, no arrest, nobody goes to jail. It's just, it's all good. He goes, but you wait till 1 a.m. and you see the black market arise because by law, these hash houses or whatever have to close. It's like the bars close at a certain time. And guess what? Man, right out in the street, there's your drug dealer, applying his wares. So I'm going, even in Amsterdam, you have a drug black market because of regulation. And the point that I'm making is whenever you have any kind of regulation, you're going to create this criminal element. I'm just, how does that not happen?
Well, let's be clear, first of all, about the state of Amsterdam, because let's be very clear that they work very much in a gray zone with this concept of decriminalization and a quasi-legalization. Remember, there are all sorts of international treaty issues that involve pressure from the United States at a global level to curtail the drugs that, the sale of the drugs that we don't want sold. And so even for Amsterdam, for the Netherlands to be able to position itself the way that it has required a certain, quasi-legal, decriminalized status, and it's still not entirely integrated commercially into the economy. So let's be clear that we can fault regulation for whatever we want to, but the fact is it is not being truly regulated there. So it is not a true commercial resource in the way that it would be if it were regulated like alcohol, for example, or like actual medicine that's sold over the counter. It does not have the status of either one of those, even in the Netherlands, which we take to be one of the more progressive countries as far as policy
time
goes.
out. What are you saying? It's not regulated enough? It's regulated differently? My point is that it's regulated. That's my point. At 1 a.m., the black market comes out.
My point would be to say that really, if you want to be rigorous about it, it's not really regulated. It's not really regulated.
Yay. I want it more regulated? What are you saying?
What I'm saying is that there's a difference between having a commodity that's accepted as a commercially regulated resource versus one that is in a gray zone where technically it's only decriminalized, but they look the other way when people sell it. So,
okay, now this is a good point that I want to make sure we get on.
And there's some subsidiary points that are very important for places like what's going on in California right now.
I understand. This is where the rubber meets the road. You're absolutely right. Let's go ahead and discuss this. When you have decriminalized, and a lot of times you'll see, legalize marijuana, and you're right. There's a lot of guys going, I don't want it legalized. I don't even want, there's no law that says anything about Bermuda grass. There's nothing on there that says anything about ragweed. There's nothing on there that says I can or can't and have whatever in my basil plant. How is it that I want to have this, schedule, whatever it is, put it from this category into the government says this category, and then we're going to move it to this category with these conditions that some central bureaucrat somewhere and a guy that says, well, doctor, what's his name said. And I'm going, whoa. That's not what they're talking about. So you'll have a lot of people that go, look, no, we are not shifting this debate to the permission level of some plant, that government, okay, the peasants have risen up enough. We're going to, redefine here, and you can do it this way under this condition with these regulations. And, oh, by the way, this big corporation that kiss the ring gets to make all the money and you don't, but you can't do it at home because of, and it's got to be, certified by and get a little tax stamp on the bottom of the pack or whatever, we get our cut. Mm-hmm. And they go, no. I'm talking, this is just a freaking plant I grow in my backyard, bite me, decriminalize. So when you look at Amsterdam, you say, whoa, that's not really legalized. That's kind of like decriminalized, and they kind of look the other way because they don't have a law to determine how you get to use your basil, your oregano. And I'm going, good. That is really the free market. That is where you go. And I go to a doctor. I look at the webpage. I say, what is the aspect of that I might want of this chemical? What can I get out of this? What kind of information can I get? And just let the market decide. Let individuals be free and own their own bodies. That is not what you're advocating. You are looking for, and because I remember our conversation before, is that we need to have, from your perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, and we could skip to the end here, and you can go ahead and help refine what I say here out of your mouth, and then you can correct me. But my impression is that we must legalize this under the control, the supervision, and the friendly suggestion of the government. We're here to give you a friendly suggestion and say, this is how you would legalize this, tax this, regulate this, use this, how it would fit into our society like alcohol, and we're going to regulate this plant that's a weed. And if we catch you growing it inside of your house, hooskow! How far off am I?
Yeah, well, no, you're not. What you've just suggested is not my position, and I'll tell you why. Let me make the argument from two different angles. I mean, yes, there is a great deal of value potentially in more regulation from my perspective as a doctor, as a physician, and I want to tell you a little bit about why. However, in Cannabinomics, and remember, the book, I'm making the argument that we're at the sort of a tipping point created by the convergence of three policy trajectories, one being the growing demand for marijuana as medicine, second be the growing recognition of the damage that the public health damage that the drug war is doing, and the third being the economic crisis, which challenges us to try to manage some of these potential resources better, so that you've got this burgeoning market of products in California that can't come to interstate trade or to global trade because of the Federal Commerce Clause that oversees that and puts a cap on it. So it's limited to being developed within the state of California. The argument that I make is that in Cannabinomics, especially in the section on economics, is that if the federal government was to take a larger regulatory approach to this, that the appropriate stance would be to have a multi-level approach that accomplished both what you are suggesting and what many of your listeners might want to hear, but also accomplished what I, as a physician, would hope for. And what I mean by this is a multi-level regulatory scheme that would have the input of many different stakeholders, including medical consumers, including those developing products, where, yes, there would be provisions to allow for a certain amount of private growth and use. In other words, if you want to grow plants in your own home or on your own land, and you're only growing them for your own use, that's one thing. What the limits of that should be, I don't know. I'm not an economist. I'm not a policymaker at that level. I don't have the answer to that. But I don't think that it should be 100% prohibited. I believe there should be some allowance for that. And as you know, even the beer industry has gone through evolutions in recent decades, where it was really the resurgence in home production of beer that led to the development of microbreweries. So all I'm saying is that there would be some allowance for individual production for their own consumption. But when you get to the point where you're putting something out on the market, now there's the question, not just generated by the fact that you're dealing with a psychoactive substance that potentially gets people high, not just that, but the issue of anything that you're selling on the market. There are generally some requirements that it not be infected, contaminated, poisoned. When people sell poisoned products, eventually, the criminal justice system gets involved. Eventually,
absolutely,
there are
and
civil lawsuits, and we have a government. We have laws established to protect people.
Absolutely,
in that way.
Force and fraud.
So
you do
now at the other. Let me just finish. Yeah, and yes, we agree there. I think, but at the other extreme would be. I treat a lot of patients in my psychiatric practice who have mental illness. Some of them have very severe mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia, where they may, hear voices. They may hallucinate and see things because they've got, a chemical imbalance and some brain abnormalities that we don't fully understand, coupled with the stress that they're under, socioeconomic stress, and their developmental history and all that. They come to me with certain symptoms.
Yeah, you got a pill for it, I'm sure.
They're looking for relief from it. There are lots of different ways that can be approached. Well, there not just one pill. There are lots of different things that I can prescribe to help people like that. And whatever one thinks of that practice, however, people are maybe more or less informed about things like mental illness, and some people don't believe in it and all that. Well, I don't really care what their views are. I mean, my point is I have a job to do. I'm paid to do a job, and if I make these people better, there's a lot of people that are thankful for that, not least of all the person who no longer wants to commit suicide because their life is much less miserable. So I treat people like that all the time. Once in a while, people come in and they say, Doc, I'm getting a better night's sleep because I started using a little bit of marijuana at night. And I'll say, well, has that caused any problems for you? And, sometimes they'll say, well, yeah, it's made me, hear voices again. But usually when they say that, they don't come in saying, I'd like to use marijuana again, Doc. They say, boy, I was reminded of how much I need to stay away from that stuff because it makes me sick. But once in a while, there are other people who come in that say, no, it doesn't bother me at all. It just helps me to sleep better. Matter of fact, it makes me a little less irritable. So there are people who will come in and report positive benefits from it. In those cases, do I immediately drug test them and tell them they need substance abuse treatment? No. I mean, I say, well, let me know if anything gets worse, and that's all I really can do in that setting. However, in California right now, there are products being produced that aren't even smokable products called tinctures that are liquids that are sprayed under the tongue or administered with an eyedropper. And under the tongue, they absorb very rapidly. They don't have to be eaten in the form of brownies or cookies, but they're administered under the tongue that way. And some of those are starting to be labeled. That is, they're measuring what the product has in it, they're standardizing the production of it, and they're beginning to say, we've got one that has a standard high concentration of THC, THC being the compound in marijuana that it's typically bred for. That's what most people want because THC is responsible for the mood elevation or the euphoria or the high, if you will. It's the THC that creates that. There are many other molecules in marijuana. A good example is something called cannabidiol or CBD. It is not psychoactive. It does not make people high. And there's some evidence from European studies that for a German study in particular, that it actually seems to have antipsychotic properties. In other words, it behaves like the very medicines that I prescribe for these very ill people and actually counters the effects of the THC, which may make them more paranoid. So, in other words, with marijuana, we're looking at a very complex plant that has a lot of chemically, structurally related molecules in it, some of which contribute to what we call the high or the mood elevation, and others have more powerful medicinal effects in other ways, but don't actually get you high.